Hi viewer, welcome to this discussion on shifting perspective on development. When you are using the term shifting perspective on development, we have to keep in mind three things. One is that what do you understand by development? When we are talking about development, we are talking a composite phenomenon of change, transition, evolution and transformation. So putting everything together, we are trying to bring in a phenomenon that is a process which has acquired a new shape in a new context from that of an earlier context. When we are talking about that shift in this development, we have to keep in mind that that shift many a time it has been guided by a variety of the forces. The shift has been guided by technological forces, at times it has been guided by the market, at times by the state, and at times by the people's initiative from the below. So this shifting developmental discourse, a shifting perspective when you talk about, we have to take cognizance of in terms of time and space, also in terms of ideological interpenetration in the whole process of development. As I was talking about, the whole process of development, it has been augmented by the expansion of the process of production of goods and services on this earth. Production of goods and services, those were family based, those were in a limited scale. When it started getting a wider scale, with the interpenetration of varieties of other forces like technological forces and market forces, that production forces got dissociated from the family. Production side became the market and distribution side become the market. So there came a new kind of phenomenon, new kind of negotiation and intersectionality between the forces of supply and demand. And gradually there has been the emergence of a new kind of phenomenon, the market-driven society, what we call. We also call in terms of a social-driven market. Also we find a market-driven market, a market-driven state. So varieties of this phenomenon has come into being. We'll be discussing some of this phenomenon, some of this concept in our discussion. But the whole process, when we talk about, it has been engineered by the industrial revolution. Industrial revolution that took place sometime in 1760s. It is also engineered by American Revolution. It is also engineered by Renaissance, Enlightenment, what we call ultimately the French Revolution, and the expansion of colonialism and a new market. And what we find in the whole process, there was the expansion of free trade, that is laissez-faire theory of the trade. And everything looked into in terms of trade, that is the three interrelationship, that is production for the market supplying to the people to acquire more profit. When it is acquiring more profit, it is again investing that profit for further generating profit and further production of goods and services. So there is a kind of a cyclical relationship. Ultimately within this cyclical relationship, there has been the growth of economic resources of certain countries in this earth, also certain segment of the society. The whole process has looked into growth as GDP, gross domestic product. So whatsoever it is looked into development as an economic growth and development as a gross domestic product. So this is a conventional phenomenon. It is talked about development as economic growth. It has been widely thought of and widely calculated till the early 1930s all over the world. Now we find the whole transition, that is what we are talking about in terms of transition from dissociation of the production process from family to that of a market. Then you find the whole process of expansion from the local to the national to the global market. These are not ideologically neutral, and nor these are neutral in terms of the interpenetration of the economic forces. This is widely interpenetrated and widely expanded with the whole expansion of market-driven capitalism that was monopolizing over the whole earth till 1920s. Why 1920s is important? Because 1920s saw two important things. One is that the Russian Revolution, that is 1917, and gradually it got maturity starting from 1920s. Also simultaneously we found a collapse of this earlier order, that is a Great Depression started coming in 1920s. So what we found, three important phenomena: the existence of the capitalistic order, we found that. Similarly, we found the collapse of the capitalistic economy, emergence of a welfare economy. Simultaneously, we found another kind of expansion, development of a socialist world. So we found three worlds that was promoting the economic development, promoting the expansion of capitalism based on three different perspectives, three different strategies. Capitalist world, the first world was looking at the expansion of the capital, expansion of goods and services, expansion of the new market, expansion of economic growth with the tool of industrialization, and that is based on private ownership of the resources, private industrialization. So what they looked into, industrialization as the vehicle of economic growth, and that vehicle to be guided by private ownership of the factors of production, land, labor, capital, and organization. Then what we found the second world. The second world was looking after in terms of a new kind of economic phenomenon, that is, it is to be guided by, they also give a lot of importance on industrialization, because economic growth can't be achieved without industrialization. They gave it is the industrialization, but industrialization to be founded on centralized planning, number one, and there will be abolition of private ownership, and they talked about the distributive justice. So what we found, a qualitative difference in terms of the perspective from private ownership to that of a community ownership, centralized planning to that of a private planning. So we kind of phenomenal difference between these two phenomena, with the two ideological difference in terms of the expansion of development discourse on this earth. In between there emerged a third factor, a third resources, and it talked about a kind of a mixed economy. Mixed economy widely emphasized on, number one, limited private ownership, also simultaneously centralized planning. It also talks about industrialization, simultaneously talks about abolition of the private property. It's also talked about the distributive justice, simultaneously talked about growth of the domestic product. So what we find, a new phenomenon started coming in on this earth in terms of three ideologies of development, and the world got divided in terms of three worlds. What we call the first world, the capitalist world, spearheaded by America and the Western the European countries. Then we find the socialist world, the Russia, China, and the East European countries. Then we find the third world, especially countries of the global south. So these three different worlds sustained and contributed to the growth of three different paths of economic development on this earth. Now, if we look into this perspective, these three perspectives are not autonomous from the historical processes, because this three perspective is inherited its historical legacy in terms of its political combination, in terms of political sensitivity of some other development on this earth. One is that this economic development was taking place, that became a slogan along with political development. What Marshall talked about, that is a new innovation started coming on this earth starting from the 18th century. What was that? He was talking about the citizenship right. No developmental discourse is sufficient and efficient enough that does not suffice the need of the citizen. But the citizen, to assert for their right, there is certain ideals, those are to be concentrated in people's thought and action, especially in the thought and action of the state. Starting from 18th centuries, there was a lot of innovation. People started talking about the civic rights, right to get together, right to speak, right to express oneself. That become part of the civic rights from 18th century. That become the political rights, one of the rights of 19th century. People started how to share the political power, right to vote, right for political participation, right for political assertion. So it created a space for political space for the citizenship. Then the 20th century, that widened the space for the social right. What are the social rights? Social rights widely talked about in terms of right to development. Right to development, not only the economic right to development as the full expression of human potential in terms of education, art, culture, all kind of potential. So it started talking about rights, that is social rights. But keep in mind, none of these rights are autonomous. All rights are interlinked, that is civic rights, political rights, and the social rights. And all these rights, one way or the other, gradually incorporated what we find in the UN Charter starting from 1948. 1948 widely talked about, that is how the civic, political and social rights of the people are to be integrated in the UN Charter. Because it is not the political elite or the military elite whose interests are to be ensured. Rather, the rights of the common man, the equality, fraternity and justice, which has evaporated out of this whole expansion of the French Revolution, that got the space for its own expression in the French Revolution, equality, fraternity and justice, that is to be integrated in the UN Charter. So UN Charter 1948 widely talked about everyone to have the economic, social and cultural rights as inseparable aspect of the development. So development is not only economic development, it also started talking about the social right, the economic rights and the cultural rights. That is, practice my own culture, practice my own religious faith, practice my own social belief, practice my own economic activities. So it is a kind of a new phenomenon started recognizing from this UN Development Charter 1948. Then we find that gradually in 1960s, a new kind of phenomenon came to reinforce what is required. Keep in mind that 1960s, the world was experiencing the Black civil rights movement, not only in America, in the Western Europe, in Australia, in all parts of the globe. So within that, it widely talked about, that is, economic, social and cultural rights of the people are to be recognized, and it widely prescribed the state, each and every state, the authorities of the state, to ensure the economic, social and cultural development of the people. So it is not only rights, right is asserted by the people, but the development activities to be ensured by the state. So we started taking a new kind of a phenomenon that is to be ensured by the state. The right to development came very strongly, explicitly in the UN document 1986. It talked about the right to development. What it talked about, everybody is entitled to participate in and contribute to and enjoy economic, social, cultural and political development in which all human rights and fundamental freedoms can be fully realized. So what is important is that it is talking along with the social, economic and cultural enabling phenomenon within which human rights can be expressed, human rights can be realized as fundamental rights and fundamental freedom of human being on this earth. So what we find, gradually a kind of a recognition of human rights, recognition of social, economic and cultural rights became a part of political discourse across the globe. Now we find along this development, a kind of a change started taking place from 1980s onward. What is important, as I told earlier, that is, world started experiencing a new kind of phenomenon starting from late 1980s. The whole control and command phenomenon of the socialist world started getting dismantled. In that way, the Berlin Wall collapsed. The USSR got dismantled. The Yugoslavia become disunited. So what we find, a new phenomenon started coming in, new economic force started coming in. They started talking about a new world with a new kind of economic phenomenon and the realities of this earth. The Washington Consensus, all the economic organizations, the banking organization, the World Bank, the World Monetary Fund, they widely prescribed a new kind of a formation, that is structural adjustment program for all countries of the world to smoothen the process of economic development through private investment. So what it was talking about, a new kind of a globalization, the globalization across the globe, and this globalization will be facilitated by the state as the agent that will provide the space for economic liberalization on this earth. By economic liberalization means providing the space for private investment in their respective countries. It also simultaneously came widely the World Development Summit 1995. World Development Summit 1995 talked about three important things. Number one, it talked about state will provide the legal and procedural framework for the expansion of the free trade across the globe, number one. It talked about, it also will ensure right to development, especially of the weakest segment of the society. It also widely talked about the process of empowerment to be ensured, process of empowerment of women, the marginalized, the socially economically poor, the indigenous people are to be ensured within the whole process of economic expansion and procedure for the development of new framework for trade and business in the society. Simultaneously, there came the World Trade Organization. It widened the framework for general agreement on trade and general agreement on trade and tariffs in services. What we widely talked about, a kind of a free trade regime, and the trade will take place across the globe, and that will be widely initiated by the process of neoliberal economic philosophy, a borderless trade, a borderless economic negotiation. So what we find along this time, starting from early 1990s, there came the wide expansion of information and communication technologies. The computer, the laptop, the mobile phone, it became one of the items that started to connect the world with the fast spread of information, fast spread of goods and services across the globe. It also brought the idea of economic neoliberalism that paved the way for a knowledge economy, that is, economy to be founded on the cultivation of human mind, a new site of production of the goods and services, and transformation of new ideas and thoughts. What we find, this phenomenon though brought a new framework of doing the business across the globe, but it also created a lot of tension between market determinism on the one hand, social and human development on the other. What is market determinism? Because economic liberalism, economic neoliberalism, it talked about, it is the market. It is the market that will take care of the employment, that will generate the wealth, and that will take care of the economic growth. Once there is economic growth, other kind of a societal inequalities, social problems, unemployment, illiteracy, ill health, that will be taken care of. But simultaneously, there also emerged a kind of a new phenomenon, new slogan of social and human development, because there is a kind of a disjunction between. It came a wide disjunction, wide kind of gap between the market-driven economic growth on the one hand and the aspiration for social and human development on the other. So what we find, that is starting from 1991, a kind of, especially the third world economists, Amartya Sen and Mehboob Haq and many others, widely started making a research on that is what kind of development it has taken place and what kind of a message is giving to the whole earth. The Human Development Report, it came back in early 90s. It widely documented a kind of a ruthless development. A ruthless development in that way that it has taken place only in certain part of the globe, and the developmental imbalances is not taken care of, and it has not reached out to each and every segment of the population. Rather, it has become the strongest people the stronger, the weakest people have become more weaker. So it has become the ruthless development. It also talks about the phenomena of jobless development. Though there is economic growth in some parts of the country, but that economic growth has not facilitated, has not accommodated the jobless people in this country. So it has not been able to give sufficient employment to the job aspirant of this earth. This growth has been voiceless. Voiceless in that way, it has not given the people that space to express their voice, the discontent of this earth. It has been futureless. It is futureless in that way, that is, it has destroyed the earth in terms of bringing highest onslaught on the environment. It is paving the way of a big climate change and also creating a big volume of CO2 on this earth. And it has been ruthless because it has not taken cognizance of the cultural phenomenon that is on which the economy is founded, on which people are founded. So what did they talked about? The development has been ruthless, jobless, voiceless, futureless, and ruthless on this earth. They brought about the phenomenon that is economic development to be ensured. Economic development, they pointed out, that is a means to an end. What is the end? End is human prosperity, the human happiness, the expression of the human potential is the prime. If that is the prime, that is to be facilitated by economic growth. So economic growth can be an end in itself. It is a means for enhancing human capability, means for bringing freedom for human being on this earth, means to bring happiness for the people on this earth. So what they talked about, a kind of a developmental phenomenon that will be more inclusive, that will take care of the interest of the weakest segment of the society, the marginalized people, the indigenous people, the slum dwellers, the aged, the children, the women, all kind of vulnerable section of the society. It is to be inclusive so that development is sufficing an end of a human freedom, that is fulfilling one aspiration, fulfilling your choice on this earth, and it is elaborating the path of one's happiness on this earth. It is not an end in itself, it is a means for human prosperity and human development on this earth. So by saying so, what they talked about the developmental perspective. It is to be integrated with a kind of a human phase. They talked about two things. One is human development, another is the social development. By human development, it is talking about bringing the human being in the center of development, number one. Number two, social development means it is to ensure that each and every segment of the population has been the beneficiaries, has got the benefits of economic development on this earth. In the Indian context, we find the developmental perspective has been part of our fundamental rights, has been part of the directive principles of the state policy. The fundamental rights of Indian Constitution, that is widely documented in the Part 3 of Indian Constitution, is widely talked about the several freedom, several rights people have to get, because this development can't be realized without having equal rights, equality, without having right to space, without having right to life, without having right to have a free environment, without having right to choice, without having the cultural rights. So everything is enshrined in our constitution in the fundamental rights. It has also been the directives to the government, directives to the state to follow appropriate state policy so that each and every citizen can realize their potential within this whole constitutional arrangement of the state and administration of the country. By doing so, the government of India, starting from early 1950s, widely talked about a kind of a planned economy. India was a part of a mixed economy, so it talks about three things. One is the planned economy. All kind of developmental processes is to be planned, so it is a centralized planned economy. It also took the path of heavy industrialization. Starting from the second 5-year plan onward, the government of India widely elaborated the heavy industrialization of some of the key sector they emphasized. It also widely talked about agrarian reform program, and later on, starting from 1960s, widely talked about the agricultural reform program. Agrarian reform is widely talked about in terms of the fact that when India got independence, our land system was quite segregated and there's enormous agrarian inequality. So it provides certain procedure. Land Reform talked about, Land Reform Act, when they talked about, number one, nobody can have more than 25 acres of land. That is a kind of a land ceiling. It started in 1952 itself. And then confiscation of the surplus vested land, those who have acquired from those people, those who have more than 25 acres of land, those land to be distributed among the landless people. It third one, they talked about the tenure security. The people, those who are the sharecropper of tenants, they should get certain rights on this land, and their rights and entitlement to be ensured. It also talked about in terms of grow more food and the consolidation of the landholding. Starting from 1960s, Government of India ushered the whole process of Green Revolution, and in some parts of the country, the Western UP, the Punjab, Haryana, and also some parts of South Tamil Nadu and also some parts of Maharashtra, they initiated the whole process of Green Revolution, that is bringing in new technology and also new biochemical innovation in terms of seeds and fertilizer. So it created a new kind of revolution in the country. So we find that is, along with industrialization, agrarian reforms and agricultural modernization became a part of the slogan. Simultaneously, there became nationalization of the bank in late 1960s. There was a heavy industrialization. Also, socialism became a part. It became part of the Indian Constitution. So what happened? The whole process, there is a transition of the state philosophy on development. The state philosophy of development, widely talking about a shift in its perspective. In 1950s, it was talking about growth with justice, that is a growth with development. That is what it was talking about. All community development, all agricultural modernization, industrialization is emphasized on the growth and growth with development. But when the agrarian inequality started taking shape, so it started talking about growth with justice from 1960s onward. Then 1960s onward, 1970s and 80s, it widely emphasized on development with empowerment. That's why in 1980s, there are 73rd constitutional amendment. It widely talked about people's participation in the sharing of power, the Panchayati Raj, local self-government, widely people's participation in the developmental process. Then also we find that in the 12th and 13th 5-year plan, widely talked about the inclusive development, that is development with inclusion, that is developmental benefits should reach out to each and every segment of the society. It should not only reach out, everybody should be part of this inclusion, the inclusive dynamics of the development, stakeholders of the development, so that there is a people's planning from the grassroots. So what we find, a new kind of varieties of the developmental scheme, starting from rural youth employment program, integrated rural development program, Mahatma Gandhi rural employment guarantee scheme. So we find varieties of the new scheme and development are brought in to give a push to the developmental perspectives of India, to ensure that each and every segment of the society become the beneficiaries of development. Now we find that this developmental journey of India has been accompanied by varieties of developmental imbalances. What are those imbalances? Let us talk a little about them. One is that there has been a huge amount of productivity, but simultaneously there has been sustained hunger. Example is that productivity of land has increased from 7 quintal per hectare to 22 quintal per hectare. But simultaneously we find that the number of the people not having sufficient food in India, they comprises roughly around 90% of the total population of the country. So what we find, that is productivity has not been accompanied by a sense of social inequality, that is social and human development. Then we find there has been economic growth, at times 9.4% economic growth, but simultaneously we find the social vulnerabilities of the tribes, the Dalits, women, the aged people has increased in this country. We also find simultaneously there has been enormous prosperity of certain segment of the population, but there has been enormous process of downward mobility of segment of the population. Those of the tenants and the small cultivators, they have been downgraded to be the agricultural laborer. Agricultural laborers are forced to migrate from one part of the country to that of another. Now we find that in our country, more than 49% of the population of the migrant population migrate from one part of the country to another, and those migration, around 90% of this migration now take place in search of employment. So what we find, a kind of developmental imbalances that has conditioned the developmental path of this country. So we find growth with unemployment. We find the burden of illiteracy in our country, the child marriage and simultaneously child labor, the growth of uncertainties, growth of urbanization with the slum. There has been fast process of urbanization in this country, but more than 20% of the urban population live in the slum areas. We also find simultaneously enormous process of gender discrimination. That is, women have been the victims of all varieties of discrimination in terms of food discrimination, right to property, right to food, right to health, right to education. Varieties of imbalances have remained associated with the gender existence in this country. We also simultaneously find criminalization of the politics. More than 28% of our parliamentarians are having the criminal records among them. So there has also been the proliferation of violence and extremism in the country. So these are the developmental imbalances that has conditioned the developmental journey of India. Along with that, we find that there has been a new kind of phenomenon in this country. What is that? Because those are the negativities, those are to be broken. For breaking those kind of anomalies and developmental inconsistencies, there have been enormous intervention of the state and civil society. State and civil society widely contributed to convert a segment of the rural population to be the beneficiaries, and also to be the beneficiaries of the development, so that they can stand on their own in terms of the citizenship right on this earth. However, despite those processes, we find that there has been enormous discontent, the social protest, social movement on the issue of the land, water, forest and livelihood security. There has been resurgence of new interests, new ideas and new identities. And what we find, those have been asserted many a time, not economic terms. Many of those assertions has taken place in terms of nativity and primordiality. What is expected that after 70 years of existence of our independence, there should be developmental balances, but there will be enormous developmental imbalances, and those imbalances are reflected widely in terms of assertion of nativity and assertion of primordial rights rather than citizenship rights and rather than secular rights. Those are to be reflected as a kind of economic categories, as a kind of a social and political categories in the society. What we find, how to be looked into that, what should be the perspective of a sociologist to make an intervention? The intervention can be made by the sociologist to develop a criticality on the developmental anomalies. Those criticalities can come in identifying the social variables those are affecting the economic and social deprivation of a huge segment of population in the country. And there should also be critical investigation on the historicity of inherited inequalities, how those are hindering the whole process of one's mobility in the society. The role of the traditional institution, the cultural values, the pre-existing and the continuous caste, class and ethnic division of the society, the negligence and the avoidance of the traditional knowledge system, the whole process of ethno-development, politicization of the development, the people's initiative at the protest. I believe these are the criticality, critical reflection, critical areas, but there should be sociological intervention. And those sociological intervention should play a good role to break the barriers of underdevelopment and create a space of equality for the people in this country. So we stop here. So before we stop, let me have a small recap of whatsoever we have discussed in this program today. First, we have discussed that is how the developmental journey of India started within the whole process of formation of three worlds of development: the first world, the capitalist world, the second world, the socialist world, and the mixed economy, and India became a mixed economy. Then we talked about how India accepted the path of the planned development, the agrarian reform, the industrialization, and also simultaneously a lot of developmental initiative. Then we talked about how despite the developmental initiative, varieties of developmental imbalances. And lastly, we talked about what should be the patterns, the issues and concern of the sociologist of social development to make effective intervention to develop an understanding of sociology of development in India. Thank you.